kitchens of the Zephyrian Palace had crafted meals sculpted from starlight, served on plates spun from moonglass. Dishes that sang, glowed, healed, and yet none of it reached her. The alien girl, heir to a galaxy, tasted nothing but disappointment, her silence sharper than any critique. That is, until a human chef, washed up and widowed, placed a grilled cheese sandwich in front of her and shattered a culinary war no one knew had begun. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe food can change more than just hunger, hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow's story might just taste even better than this one. The Zephyrian royal dining chamber could seat 300 dignitaries, yet today it hosted only one, a child with violet skin and tired, ancient eyes. Princess Arinya of the 9th Crown sat so still at the table's edge she might have been carved from the same opaline stone as the floor beneath her. Her plate glistened under the floating lights, petal foam risotto, dream root parfait, a sphere of reverse-cooked kelp that whispered in a voice only noble palates could hear, but none of it moved her. The attending chefs, 7 of them, from 7 systems, watched with held breath behind the crystal veil that separated kitchen from court. Each had prepared a dish sanctioned by the culinary accord of 3,489. Each had been promised royal recognition if their creation could make the princess eat, and each, in turn, had failed. Arinya leaned forward, inhaled the scent, and then pushed the plate gently away. No scowl, no tantrum, just a small sigh that sounded like it had traveled across 100 light years of disappointment. "She's broken," muttered one of the sous chefs under his breath. "No," said the head culinary strategist, a tall, creased woman from the Sarith cluster. "She's just grieving. That's what they do." "But for how long?" another whispered. "It's been months. The queen's silence we understand, but the child, what child refuses melt fruit pastries?" Silence fell again as the food was cleared. Another offering, untouched. Another failure. Behind the veil, kitchen screens blinked red. The logs tallied rejections like war wounds. 74 meals denied in the last cycle. 992 in total since Arinya had last consumed anything outside nutrient-4 drips. "She'll starve at this rate," someone said. "She chooses to starve," corrected the strategist. "There's a difference." They all turned as the outer door creaked open. A figure stepped in, not in crisp palace whites or chrome-rimmed culinary gear, but in a faded black t-shirt under a scuffed apron, sleeves pushed up past forearms lined with heat scars. A man with sandy blonde hair, sun-creased eyes, and a look like he hadn't seen sleep in 2 rotations. "Who the hell let him in?" the strategist hissed. He ignored her and crossed to the pantry. "Name?" barked a junior server. "Grayson," he said matter of fact. "Just the temp. Kitchen 47D. You're not assigned here. Wasn't told that mattered." He pulled open a drawer and retrieved 2 slices of something ancient. Bread. Actual bread, not engineered grain slabs or nutrient wafers. Bread that flaked like history. From his bag, he withdrew a small block of yellow cheese, real earth cheddar, illegal in half the quadrant. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. He just began to heat the pan, and from across the chamber, beyond crystal and protocol, Princess Arinya blinked. Once, she had caught the scent of something, not royal, not forbidden, something real, and for the first time in 1,000 rejected dishes, she did not look away. Kitchen 47D was not a kitchen in the traditional sense. It was more of a forgotten utility cell, tucked behind the waste reprocessing core and below the gravitational stabilization deck. No one of importance cooked there. It didn't hum with orchestra-grade prep bots or broadcast recipes on scent ribbon holograms. Its stove was a manual coil top, and its air was heavy with yesterday's grease and something resembling dust, but older. Grayson Holt liked it that way. He stood over the burner, watching the cheese begin to sweat between the slices of bread. The sizzle was modest, shy. Not the dramatic flash of flambe, nor the hiss of ice fruit reduction. Just butter meeting metal, just heat doing its work slowly. Grayson didn't move much as he cooked. Each motion economical. Flip the sandwich, press it lightly, adjust the flame with a flick. You could see the story in his hands, the scarring across his knuckles. The fingerprint ridges melted flat. Those were old wounds, earned in kitchens where fire had no sympathy and failure had no second chances. He had once cooked in restaurants with stars pinned to their names, not the 5-point kind, but the burning celestial kind, off-world contracts, alien nobles, diplomatic feasts. Then came the collapse. Earth fell, his wife with it, and the stars, once invitations, became just reminders of what he'd lost. So he took work no one wanted. Palace maintenance kitchen, off-rank, off-roster. Make lunch for the guards, the laundry crew, the mop team. Stay invisible. Grayson liked being invisible, until today. Today, he had walked into the High Court galley like a man possessed. He hadn't even planned to. He'd been on his way to deliver meal packs to the waste sorters when the pantry doors whispered open, and the scent of failure greeted him like an old friend. That's when he saw her, Princess Arinya, seated in a chamber that reeked of sugar and desperation. All those towering chefs in spotless coats, and her, alone, looking not like royalty but like a kid who didn't want to be alive. So Grayson did what made sense to him. He made her a sandwich, not because he thought it would change anything, but because sometimes grief just needed something warm and simple to hold, something soft around the edges, something you didn't have to understand to love. He plated it without fanfare, no garnish, no silver, just grilled cheese, cut in 2 diagonals, the way Earth kids had liked it for generations. He looked toward the door. He shouldn't deliver it. He wasn't allowed. But then again, she wasn't eating anyway. He wrapped the plate in a clean cloth and moved toward the chamber. Behind him, the stove clicked off. The scent lingered, stubborn and golden, and in kitchen 47D, something quiet had begun to shift. The dining chamber recognized Grayson as soon as he stepped through its side threshold, though not by name, not by title, for he had none. It recognized him by the absence he carried, the gap in protocol, the lack of spectacle, the utterly unremarkable weight of a plate held in both hands like a peace offering. He walked past dishes that glowed faintly with molecular resonance, past a tower of gelatinous spheres, each infused with micro-flavor algorithms, past chefs who stared with half-open mouths, their pride wrapped around their necks like tight collars. "Stop him," hissed one of the silver-robed attendants, but no one moved. Perhaps it was the way he walked, unhurried, neither defiant nor meek, just a man bringing food to a child who had asked for nothing and been offered everything except the one thing she seemed to need. The plate touched down on the table with a soft, ordinary sound. The sandwich had browned perfectly, golden crusts crisp to paper, thin edges, the cheese still molten between. No aroma enhancers, no edible glitter, just heat and hunger. Princess Arinya said nothing. She stared at the plate. Her wide, dark eyes flicked to the man who had set it down, then back to the sandwich. Her hands, so often folded politely in her lap, lifted, hesitant, as if fearing she'd wake from this moment. Grayson said only one thing: "It's okay if you don't like it." He didn't bow, didn't smile. He simply turned and began to walk away. The strategist surged forward, face pale with fury. "This is a royal chamber. You cannot just—" "Did she ask for your permission to starve?" Grayson asked, not turning. That stopped her. He kept walking. Behind him, a sound cut through the stunned silence like a dropped crystal. A bite. No fanfare, no audible gasp, just a soft crunch of bread giving way under small teeth. Then another bite. The room inhaled. Princess Arinya, still silent, chewed thoughtfully. Slowly, her expression unreadable, except for one detail. Her eyes had changed. They were not brighter, not happier, but they were focused. On the sandwich, on the warmth, on the taste. The strategist opened her mouth again, but the Queen's advisor, a silent figure who had stood unmoving until now, raised a single finger. "Let her finish," he said. No one dared speak again. At the kitchen doors, Grayson paused. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stood there, listening as the room held its breath for a girl who had eaten nothing for almost a year. And now, bite by quiet bite, was remembering how, by the time he left, the grilled cheese was half gone. That was all. And it was enough to change everything. The grilled cheese incident, if it could be called, that spread through the palace like a breath held too long. Not a roar, not even a whisper, just the unmistakable change in air pressure that came before a storm. In the following cycle, Princess Arinya did not ask for another sandwich, nor did she eat anything else, but she didn't return to her nutrient fours either. She simply sat at the edge of each meal, fingers gently tracing the rim of her plate, like she was waiting for something she couldn't name. In kitchen 47D, Grayson returned to routine. Eggs for the engineers, stew for the sanitation crew, flatbread wraps for the orbital welders. No one mentioned the royal table. No one acknowledged what he had done, and that suited him. But on the third day after the bite, someone left a folded piece of parchment on the pantry shelf. No comms beacon, no data chip, just a hand-scrawled note. The princess asked if the sandwich man was real or just a dream. Grayson read it once, then again, then folded it slowly and slid it into his apron pocket next to an old photo he hadn't looked at in years. That night, he stayed in the pantry long after shift's end, not hiding, just avoiding. The big kitchens upstairs were loud with arguments, chefs furious at being upstaged by a maintenance cook with peasant bread. There were talks of disciplinary action, of food safety violations, of tradition. They called him ghost, outsider, human salvage. He leaned against the wall, feeling the cold of the stone seep into his back. Dream, huh? He murmured. Guess that makes her the first kid who ever dreamed about me. His voice didn't echo. The pantry was too full of flour sacks, aged oils, and silence. Outside, through the crack in the wall paneling, he could hear the night patrols change shift. The Queen's Guard moved like blades through velvet, their boots whispering across polished halls. There were rumors that the Queen herself had asked about the man from the lower kitchens. Rumors that she'd smiled just once when her daughter asked if grilled cheese could be royal. He didn't believe that part. Queens didn't smile at kitchen ghosts. He stayed until the room dimmed fully into rest cycle lighting. Then he moved to the prep table, pulled out his pan, and began again. 2 slices. Butter. A little garlic in the press this time. He didn't know if she'd eat it, or if this was just indulgence, but it was the only thing that made his hands feel like they still had a reason. The sandwich sizzled quietly, and outside the pantry, unnoticed by Grayson, the royal advisor stood in shadow near the door, watching, not speaking, just remembering a time when food wasn't about protocol or symbolism, just nourishment, just care, just someone feeding someone else. By the 4th offering, the palace kitchens were divided. On one side, the old guard chefs trained in galactic cuisine diplomacy, master formulists of edible art, zealots of ceremonial plating. They argued that what the princess needed was a reclamation of appetite, not some primitive peasant sandwich dragged in from a dead planet. On the other side, silence, uneasy, curious, watching, because Arinya had finished the second grilled cheese in its entirety. She hadn't spoken, not a word, but she had eaten slowly, methodically, her eyes tracing the crispy golden edges, her fingers lightly brushing the toast line, as if remembering something older than memory. When she was done, she had folded the napkin once, exactly in half, and nodded. Just once. The palace hadn't seen such a gesture from her in nearly a cycle. Word traveled fast. Not through channels or announcements, but through side glances and half-whispers passed between servers and aides. She nodded, they said. To him? No. To the napkin. Somehow. That made it worse. In kitchen 47D, Grayson remained beneath notice. No promotion, no parade, not even a formal reprimand. He was simply asked informally, through a sticky note left on a rusted prep droid, if he would continue providing sustenance to the royal appetite. And he snorted at the phrasing, then made another sandwich. He added a sliver of pickled relief this time, for acidity. Meanwhile, the Queen did not comment publicly, nor did she interfere, but she listened. Every evening, her aide would report the meal logs. Today, grilled cheese, modified, consumed in full. Sometimes, they included irrelevant details. She ate crosswise this time, not diagonal. She looked at the plate before the first bite. She closed her eyes after the third. These were not the things you told a queen, but they were what she wanted to hear. In the corridors, things began to change. Servers no longer smirked when they passed Grayson. Some even offered a nod. The mop crews started leaving small packets of spice or scraps of preserved earth herbs on the kitchen bench, a silent gesture of solidarity, of respect. Once, someone left an apple, not a synthetic clone, a real apple. Bruised, imperfect, redder than anything had a right to be. Grayson washed it, sliced it, served it beside the sandwich. The princess ate half the slices. The next day, she asked the aide not aloud, but by pointing to find out what the red was called. The aide, stunned, whispered, "Apple." Arinya mouthed it once, and from the far end of the long, empty dining hall, the queen, hidden in shadow behind the one-way glass of the observation cove, placed a hand over her heart and let herself breathe. Not victory, not yet, but a breath all the same. And in the pantry, Grayson quietly began to write down the sandwich recipes. Not for posterity, not for publication, just in case someone ever needed them again. In the grand archive of royal meals, where every course served to the monarchy was logged, categorized, and hollow engraved for future statecraft, no one knew quite where to place grilled cheese. The archivists debated quietly behind their frosted screens. It wasn't a sanctioned delicacy. It hadn't been imported, genetically encoded, or blessed by the order of nutritional harmony. It was bread and cheese. And yet, the girl was eating again. Outside the dining hall, a low tension buzzed through the palace like a forgotten alarm. The upper kitchens were livid. 3 of the empire's top chefs threatened to resign in protest. One swore he'd rather serve hydroponic algae to prisoners on the ice moons than compete with comfort food. Grayson, of course, remained unaware, or pretended to be. In kitchen 47D, the light flickered overhead with its usual low hum. He was slicing through a loaf of earth sourdough, donated quietly by an engineer who once trained in Marseille. The loaf was imperfect, cracked in one corner, irregular in shape. Grayson looked at it with something close to reverence. A guard appeared at the doorway, not one of the ones who usually came for his leftover stew. "Message," the guard said, offering a sealed envelope. Grayson wiped his hands on his apron and took it. Inside was a single slip of black parchment, embossed in white ink. "Tomorrow, no meal will be served. The princess begins a new round of vocal therapy. Thank you for your service thus far." He stared at the message for a long time. "Service, huh?" he muttered, placing the note down beside the cracked heel of bread. The next day, true to form, the princess did not appear for lunch. The table remained set, silver lids covering uneaten perfection. Grayson didn't cook, he just cleaned. The day after, however, something strange happened. A box appeared in kitchen 47D. No label, just a dull silver lid. Inside, a grilled cheese sandwich. Attempted, poorly. The bread was too thick, the cheese not quite melted, the butter uneven, but it had been made by someone else and delivered to him. Beneath it, a note. Short, block letters. A child's hand. "I tried." Grayson sat down heavily on the nearest crate. His hands, still scarred and steady, trembled just a little. He read the note again. Not because he needed the message repeated, but because it didn't feel possible. The girl who hadn't spoken in months, who had refused 1,000 royal dishes, had made this a lopsided, half-burned attempt at what he'd given her. A sandwich, and in doing so, had returned something the palace had all but buried. Intent, not obedience, not protocol, not tradition, just the quiet act of feeding someone and hoping it matters. He didn't eat it. He couldn't. Instead, he sealed it in a vacuum wrap, labeled it by hand, and tucked it onto the top shelf of the pantry, where only he ever looked. Then he went back to the stove, because the girl had tried, and trying deserved an answer. The next meal was different. Not in ingredients. Grayson still used the same earth bread, the same hand-shaved cheddar, but in intention. There was something reverent in how he layered the slices, like building a bridge instead of a snack. He added a pinch of smoked salt this time, not because he thought it would impress, but because he remembered his daughter once saying it made everything taste like campfire dreams. Zebra. He didn't plate it. He wrapped it, not in silk or chromatic paper, but in brown parchment, folded twice, then tied with a single strand of kitchen twine. Simple, honest. The kind of thing you handed to someone without ceremony, without a tray or a flourish, just warmth wrapped in care. He walked it to the dining hall himself. The usual guards weren't there. Instead, 2 new sentries in ceremonial armor flanked the entrance, their spears upright, their faces unreadable. "You're not permitted today," one said. "She requested it," said a voice from the shadows. The Queen's advisor emerged, eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights and watching too many untouched meals. Grayson raised a brow. "She wrote," the advisor said simply. 2 words. He handed over a tablet. On it, in shaky, uncertain letters, "Grilled." "Please." Grayson's fingers tightened slightly around the wrapped sandwich. He said nothing, just nodded once and passed through the threshold. The chamber was quieter than usual. No chefs, no attendants, no observation. Only Princess Arinya, sitting at the edge of that endless table, knees tucked under her chair, hands folded too neatly for a child. She didn't look up when he approached. He placed the sandwich in front of her, still warm, still imperfect, but his. He stepped back, hands at his sides, and she moved. No hesitation this time, no theatrical pause, just small fingers untangling the string, unfolding the parchment. The crust cracked as she lifted the sandwich, the golden seam of melted cheese pulling apart, slow and stringed like memory, stretching between timelines. She took a bite, then another. Then she set it down, looked up, and spoke. Not loudly, not clearly, but the sound was unmistakable. "Thank you." The words shattered something in the room. Maybe it was silence. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was just the shell of a grief no one had known how to hold. Grayson's throat caught. He blinked hard once and gave her the smallest, gentlest smile he had. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. He turned and left her with the rest of the sandwich. Behind him, the advisors waiting beyond the archway looked at one another with something close to disbelief. She spoke. One whispered. She thanked him. And in kitchen 47D, later that evening, Grayson stared at his empty prep table for a long time, hands motionless, as if he were waiting for a recipe to arrive from the air. Eventually, he wrote 2 words down on the back of a used inventory slip. She spoke. He folded it, slipped it into the same pocket as her note, and exhaled for the first time in weeks. Word of Arinya's voice spread like a soft quake, unfelt at first, then deeply known. Not declared through palace bulletins or broadcast to the outer colonies, but in the subtle ways people carried themselves. Guards at the gate nodded more often. Servers spoke just a touch gentler. The court's whispers no longer curled around pity or frustration, but something far more volatile. Hope. And in kitchen 47D, Grayson stood before a simmering pot of tomato bisque. Not a command, not a request, just instinct. Because grilled cheese had always been about more than cheese and bread. It was a pairing. It was balance. Warm salt against gentle acid, crunch against cream. A sandwich made you full, soup made you safe. He hadn't cooked this in years, not since Earth. Not since his daughter's last sick day, when she'd curled up beside the heater vents in their apartment and declared that only Dad's soup and toasties could fix a sore heart. His hands moved differently when he made this, slower, with memory baked into every stir. He roasted the tomatoes himself, no hydroponic shortcuts, letting their skins blister and peel before blending them into silk. He added garlic, onion, basil, shaved so fine it melted on the tongue. Then a swirl of real cream, the kind that came from animals no longer raised. When he served it, he didn't bring a tray, just a bowl, a cup of soup, a sandwich, halved. He entered the dining chamber to find Arinya already waiting. But this time, she wasn't alone. The Queen stood behind her, tall, still, crownless. She watched as Grayson placed the plate. No guards moved, no advisors spoke, just silence. Rich with what it could become, Arinya dipped the sandwich into the soup like she had always known how. Her first bite was quieter than before, but her second came faster. She finished the cup before she finished the sandwich, and then she did something no one expected. She leaned her head against the table's edge, closed her eyes and smiled. Only slightly, only briefly, but unmistakably. Grayson turned to leave, but the Queen's voice stopped him. "You remember how to make that?" she said, her tone not asking. "I remember a lot of things no one asked me to keep," he replied. Their eyes met across the stone floor, hers rimmed with centuries, his lined with exhaustion. She didn't ask his history. She didn't question the ingredients. Instead, she said, "Tomorrow, make it again." And Grayson, unsure whether it was an order or a favor, simply nodded. That night, he stayed late in the kitchen, not to prep, not to write recipes, just to sit, spoon in hand, tasting what he hadn't tasted since the world fell apart. The soup was warm, and somehow, it still remembered him. By the end of the second week, the palace kitchens had shifted, not by decree, not by structural overhaul, but in the way breath shifts in a room before someone begins to cry. Dishes changed, not publicly, not on the official banquet menus or during state receptions, but in the food handed quietly to staff during midnight shifts. Meals were simpler now, heartier. Someone left a batch of handmade dumplings in the barracks oven with no name attached. A steward from Vela 3 brought her father's curry blend to share in the lower commissary. And on the top floor, in the throne chamber itself, a conversation began with 4 words no one had expected. Why hasn't she eaten? It came from the crown delegate of Tarsis, a planet known more for mathematical purism than empathy. He gestured toward a holographic scroll listing Arinya's dietary patterns, bland statistics of calories declined and nutritional injections accepted. "Is this a protest?" he asked, brows pinched. "It's grief," replied the queen evenly. The room fell silent. 12 royal advisors, 3 cultural interpreters, and 2 artificial historians looked to one another but said nothing. Then she continued, "She ate yesterday, and the day before. Not your offerings, not your sky-boiled Nova oysters or your quantum paste tarts. A sandwich," one of the elder ministers scoffed. "With respect, Your Majesty, a sandwich is not sufficient nourishment for the heir of—" "It's not about nourishment," the queen said, standing. The air changed again. She rarely stood during these briefings, rarely raised her voice. The girl is eating because someone gave her something that asked nothing in return. No honor, no performance, no symbolism. Just food that remembered what it meant to feel safe. A long pause. Then from the far side of the table, the Polaran delegate leaned forward. "And who is this someone?" The queen didn't answer immediately. She walked to the edge of the chamber, where a mosaic of past rulers spread across the wall, crowns, blades, glories. "There was once a time when cooks ruled by spoon instead of spectacle," she murmured. The court didn't know what to make of that. "Is he credentialed?" another asked. "Certified in interspecies cuisine. He is a man," the queen replied, with burned hands and a memory for flavor. "But if your concern is safety, speak it plainly. If your concern is protocol, you may leave." No one left. In kitchen 47D, Grayson was unaware that his name had been mentioned in the throne room. He was wiping down the counter, humming softly, when the young royal aide stepped into the doorway with a paper tucked under his arm. "She wants to try something new," the aide said, a bit breathless. Grayson blinked. "New? How?" She asked for it, not in words. She pointed to a picture in a book from the Earth Archives. Something with peanut butter and banana. On toast. Grayson raised an eyebrow, then chuckled. "All right," he said, reaching for a skillet. "Let's teach the galaxy what Elvis already knew." And in that moment, a line had been crossed. Not a rebellion, not a revolution, but something deeper. A fork in the palace's road, where comfort challenged custom and flavor became a form of trust. They called an emergency meeting of the culinary tribunal. 12 elite chefs from across the quadrant, each decorated in medals woven from edible gold, sat in a crescent of floating thrones. Their uniforms shimmered with self-cleaning fabrics and heat-reactive sigils that pulsed softly with their biometric rhythms. The chamber of gastronomic integrity, rarely used except for scandal or sabotage, flickered to life for the first time in 3 cycles. "Let the record show," began Magistrate Duval, voice sharpened like a whetted blade, "that the consumption of grilled cheese and other such primitive dishes by Her Highness Princess Arinya poses a direct threat to the prestige of Zephyrian culinary sovereignty. No one clapped. This wasn't theater. "This is a child recovering from trauma," said the youngest member. "A soft-spoken taste, mapper from the Terran colonies. Not a menu to be managed. She's a symbol," hissed another. "She must reflect the values of refinement." "But she ate," said someone near the back. "After 1,000 refusals. Doesn't that count for something?" The chamber shuddered as silence moved like wind through glass. Meanwhile, in kitchen 47D, Grayson stood over a mixing bowl. Peanut butter. Real. He'd bartered 3 shifts of extra cleaning for it from a black market cargo ship. Bananas sliced unevenly. Toast, just a little burned. He didn't make it pretty. He made it right. Across the palace, Princess Arinya sat at the corner of the long table, legs swinging beneath the chair. She had begun to hum not a song with lyrics or form, but a soft melodic pattern she repeated when her hands weren't busy. When the toast was placed before her, she paused, inhaled, and smiled. The queen, watching from the shadows of the observation gallery, did not smile. But she leaned forward, just slightly, as if the scent reminded her of something older than her throne. One bite, then another. A crumb fell, and the princess giggled. It was the first sound she'd made that wasn't survival. In the chamber of gastronomic integrity, the debate raged. "This sets a precedent," Duval snapped. "What happens if other children of the court demand common food? Will we be flipping pancakes at coronations, frying sausages at trade talks?" "Maybe we should," said the young Terran again. "Bolder now. Food is not just ceremony," said another chef, older, quieter. "It's language. If she understands this one, who are we to silence it?" Duval's chair pulsed red. "This is culinary anarchy." And in kitchen 47D, Grayson plated another sandwich, this time with a drizzle of honey on the crust, a trick his daughter had loved. He packed it gently, wrapped it twice, not for approval, not for ritual, just because she asked. And that was enough. Somewhere in the palace, a law was being written in invisible ink, not by decree, but by simplicity, one bite at a time. By the time Princess Arinya requested her 4th non-regulation meal, the palace kitchens had quietly fractured. The old guard still controlled the ceremonial floors. Plating engineers and molecular fusers whispered their indignation while reshaping gravity noodles and levitating spice blossoms. But deeper in the belly of the palace, a new kind of rhythm had taken hold, one of pots and pans, of knives dulled from real use, of steam rising from dishes that didn't glow but still warmed the bones. It started with the dishwashers. They began leaving extra ingredients on Grayson's prep shelf. A wedge of citrus from a foreign station, a jar of homemade plum preserve from a retired cleaner whose daughter worked the fermentation vaults. Then the bakers joined in. Not the prestige bakers who molded sugar into sculpture, but the ones who made crusty brown loaves for janitors and aides. They started tweaking their breads, adding flax, roasting the wheat longer, leaving anonymous notes. "Try this one next." No one said rebellion. They just cooked differently. Meanwhile, Arinya had begun requesting meals through drawings. No words, just charcoal sketches left on a napkin or scratched into the condensation of her water glass. A triangle with steam for grilled cheese, a round bowl with sun rays for soup, a smiley face beside a stick figure holding a plate. Every sketch went to Grayson. Every sketch was answered. In chapter hall meetings, the Queen remained largely silent on the matter. She listened as ministers spun anxiety into policy, but she issued no directives, no bans, no warnings. Only once did she speak. "Let the kitchen speak with its hands. If they tell the truth, we will know." It wasn't permission, it was prophecy. One morning, a visitor arrived, Chef Ral Elthar, culinary diplomat from the core rings, known for reprogramming entire populations' palates with scent particles encoded with memory. He observed a single meal, peanut butter toast, banana slices arranged like stars. He watched Arinya eat every bite. No guards, no prompting, just breakfast. And at the end, she looked up and said to Grayson, "Can I help next time?" Ral Elthar stood, walked out, and didn't speak for the rest of his visit. Later that evening, a shipment arrived in kitchen 47D, 2 crates of aged Terran cheese, a gift from Elthar's private reserve. A note attached. "For the one who remembers." The ripple spread. Cooks in other districts began asking for recipe copies. Ship stewards sent requests for human-child food protocols. One school on Zephyrion's southern ring began serving grilled cheese once a week, Arinya's Day, the children called it. No one had planned for it to spread, but truth, once tasted, is difficult to forget, especially when it's warm and golden and passed hand to hand across a table that had grown far too cold. And in the center of it all, Grayson kept cooking, not because he had been asked, but because somewhere between the soup and the sandwiches, a galaxy had started listening again. The palace kitchens weren't designed for fire, not real fire at least. Heat came from controlled plasma, from precision beams and thermal algorithms that adjusted by nanosecond. But tonight, in Kitchen 47D, something ancient flickered in the corner, a portable flame stove, jury-rigged by one of the older custodians from the archives wing. "No questions," she'd said, setting it down with a wink. "Just thought it might be time to let something remember." Grayson stared at it. The last time he'd cooked over a flame, Earth hadn't yet folded into memory. He rolled up his sleeves, lit the flame, and watched as it caught flickering orange and imperfect. Perfect. Princess Arinya had drawn something new that morning. A stick figure with a circle on its head and a loaf in one hand, the other hand reaching toward a flame. The caption, clearly added by someone else's hand, read, "She wants to make it with you." So he waited, and at second shift's end, she arrived small, barefoot, wrapped in a plain robe with a patch sewn over the heart. The patch wasn't royal. It was a slice of bread stitched in yellow thread. She said nothing, just climbed onto the step stool beside him. He handed her the butter brush. "Pan first," he murmured. She nodded. They worked in rhythm, him slicing, her spreading. Her small hands trembled at first, but steadied with each stroke. He watched her, never correcting, only guiding. When she slipped, he showed her how to scrape without shame. The bread hit the hot pan with a hiss. Arinya smiled, not the hesitant smile from before, but something deeper and understanding. "What does it remember?" she asked, voice small but clear. Grayson blinked. "What does what remember?" "The fire." He paused, the question anchoring him in place. "It remembers," he said slowly, "how to warm without burning, how to feed without fear, how to keep going, even when everything else has gone dark." She didn't respond. She just nodded and watched the crust form. When they served the sandwich, they shared it cut diagonally, one half each. The bite she took was smaller this time, more careful. But after she swallowed, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "I want to learn how to do this," she said. "Always." Grayson felt something shift in his chest. Not pride, not relief, legacy. It was the feeling he thought had been buried with his daughter long ago. He reached into his apron and pulled out a grease-smudged journal. Inside, every sandwich variation, every tweak, every story etched in recipe form. He handed it to her. "Only rule," he said. "You don't cook for kings. You don't cook for crowns." "Then who? You cook for the kid who won't eat. The tired one, the quiet one, the forgotten one." She nodded solemnly and tucked the journal under her arm like a sacred text. That night, a smell unlike any on Zephyrion drifted through the palace, a little smoke, a lot of butter, and something harder to name, memory warmed by flame. And in chambers lined with crystal and gold, people woke with hunger for something they'd never known they'd missed. The day the Queen stepped into Kitchen 47D, no one announced her. No trumpets, no procession, no recorders. She walked alone, her robes traded for a simple charcoal shawl, her crown absent. She moved like someone stepping into sacred ground, not because of reverence, but because of history. Grayson looked up from the counter, where he was pressing the edges of a sandwich closed with a fork. Old school. Arinya sat beside him, legs swinging, chin smudged with flour. Her tiny fingers carefully sprinkled herbs onto a second plate. She started experimenting, Grayson said, not stopping his work. "Mint and honey today. I don't know if it'll work." The Queen didn't speak right away. She stepped forward and picked up one of the sandwiches, still warm on its paper wrap. Her fingers, more used to the weight of decrees and edicts, now held something fragile, uncomplicated. She took a bite, chewed, closed her eyes, and smiled. Not the restrained ceremonial smile of state dinners, but the smile of a mother remembering laughter in a silent hall. Grayson said nothing. Beside him, Arinya held out a cloth napkin. "For your hands," she said. The Queen accepted it, her fingers trembling just slightly. "I've read the tribunal reports," she said, once the sandwich was gone. "About what this food has done, what it's undone." Grayson wiped his hands. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. You didn't mean for it to go far at all," she said. "That's why it worked." She turned to Arinya. "Are you happy?" Arinya nodded. "I'm hungry now." The Queen's smile deepened. "Good." Later that cycle, the Queen issued a private writ, the Covenant of Common Nourishment. It didn't abolish the royal culinary protocols, nor did it demand grilled cheese at every summit. But it did something far more radical. It opened the kitchens, all kitchens, to anyone willing to cook for others, not to impress, not to perform, but to heal. In the weeks that followed, similar programs spread to distant moons and capital rings. War-torn settlements began daily, shared bread hours. Schools introduced cooking circles. And in a small education center carved into a cliffside on the outer rim, children of 5 species grilled their first sandwiches together under the stars. One of their teachers was human, one was not, and both taught from a small, grease-stained journal that had once lived in a janitor's apron. Grayson never took a title. He never accepted the honors offered, never wore the golden ladle they tried to hang around his neck. He stayed in kitchen. 47D, cooking, teaching Arinya how to read food like music, how to listen to hunger like it was a language, and how to answer it without grandeur, just warmth and a little bit of cheese.